This is the FCB Radio Network, home of the best personalities and where real talk lives. Online at fcbradio.com. FCB.
Hey guys, welcome to another edition of Just Listen to Yourself with Kira Davis. I, of course, am your host, Kira Davis, and this is the podcast where we take hot topics, hot button issues, and we discuss the talking points of those issues, and we draw them out to their logical conclusions. Because I believe that when we take the time to actually examine some of the things we're saying, it can turn out we're not always saying what we think we are. So this is an exercise in critical thinking. It's often an exercise in persuasion, but mostly it's just an exercise in self-examination, making sure that we're in touch with what we believe, because I do think that that makes political conversations a lot less tense. When you go into a conversation confident of what you believe, you don't have to convince the other person that you're right. You're just engaging in an interesting political conversation, and you can all go on your way afterwards, and no one has to invoke Hitler. I know. Sounds radical, huh? I'm recording this today on January 28th, and as I record, the entire stock market is blowing up thanks to Reddit nerds. There's a lot going on in the financial sector today that actually is going to have some long-term ramifications for everybody in this country, whether or not you participated in this crazy GameStop stuff and Reddit stuff and with the Robinhood app and trading's been frozen and all of that. Whether or not you've participated in what's happening today, it's going to have an effect on you because the markets affect all of us. So it's going to be an interesting time. I definitely have a lot to say about what's happening today. If you go follow me on Twitter, you'll see me raging on there. But I think I'm going to record my thoughts on that in video form because I want to talk to people about it. So you should keep your eyes on my YouTube channel. I don't use it very much, but I intend to be using it more as we move into the future. And it's just Kira Davis. There's a few videos on there. I've cleaned it up a lot. I used to have a lot of videos. I stopped doing YouTube because they demonetized me. And so there was just no reason to keep using them. But it's still a platform that's available to me. So I will post a video there. Go ahead, subscribe to my YouTube channel, and then you can check it out from there. And hopefully I'll get something up. Well, I really intend to get something up today as after I record this, but we'll see how time treats me. And I know that I've been threatening to give you this death penalty episode, so I've decided I'm going to go ahead and release it on the heels of this podcast. I plan to release it by Sunday of this recording week. So you're kind of getting a twofer this week. You're getting two in close proximity to each other, but that's because I know a lot of you have been curious, and I've been talking about it forever. I've had two-party system on my docket forever. I'm going to get that out of the way. And today I just feel really strongly about recording on this issue. Now, I really want to talk about what's happening in the financial sector, but I don't think that JLTY is the place for that. Not right now. Maybe if I can hone in on some specific policy or some specific distillable, is that a word? Distillable morality around this issue, then I can adjust it on JLTY. Right now, I'm just like really mad about it. It just seems like a huge injustice what's happening as far as the little guy. But let's move on. That's for another time. Today, we're going to talk about the merits and the pros and the cons of the two-party system that we have here in America. I get a lot of questions about this. Because I'm Canadian, I have lived under a parliamentary system, although admittedly, it's been a long time. I've been an American since I was about 18, 19 years old. So I haven't lived under one for a while, but I've always admired the two-party system of America, and I've always felt that it worked better. And a lot of times I'll see Americans saying things like, we need more options. We need a parliamentary system like the Brits, like the Canadians. And I understand the arguments behind it, but I don't think people are thinking about what that means. I don't think a lot of people put a lot of effort into thinking about why a two-party system exists in the United States and why it's actually a superior system. I feel that this is a superior system. Not a perfect system, please. Please understand that I do not in any way think that our system is perfect and the best system that could possibly ever be, and that there's no issues with corruption and cronyism and gridlock and all of that. Well, I'll get to all of this as we delve into today's subject, two-party system. Is a two-party system good for America? Yay or nay? Well, I'm going to tell you up front that I fall down on the yay side. I do think that a two-party system is preferable and it's good for the business of politics, and I'll explain why. The number one argument against a two-party system that you hear all the time is there aren't enough choices. We need more choices. At the end of every election, we just end up having to pick between this old white guy and that old white guy. And with a couple of exceptions, obviously, by this time in history. But still, it's still kind of an established political class at the end of the day that we're choosing from, which mostly turns out to be older, wealthy white men who maybe people feel are out of touch or who represent the factions of the parties that are out of touch with the people. And we just need to look to the election of 2016 between Trump and Hillary, when there were a lot of people who just kind of hated both people and felt like, well, I'm just having to pick between these two establishment rich white folks who still are nothing like me. So there is a big argument to be made that a two-party system limits the choices of people, and it puts us into a position where we're all forced to choose between two people that we don't really want. And we're not always getting maybe the most honest candidate, or perhaps that this two-party system is keeping out those honest and good candidates that could rise to the top if there were more avenues for them to get there. I understand this argument, but I wholeheartedly disagree with this argument. I understand it on the surface. It can look like the two parties block out any chance for choice. But I think we're looking at it the wrong way. It's not that they dismiss choice, it's that the choice happens at different levels. And I'm going to tell you why it's good that choice is at the lower levels as we move forward. So hang with me. We don't need to look any further than our current political climate right now. The Republicans lost terribly in these last elections. And by terribly, I don't necessarily mean numbers-wise, but we all know the weirdness surrounding the election. Any way you cut it, it was bad for Republicans. Either they were totally unprepared for fraud, or they were just complete losers and the people spoke against them. Either way, the Republicans blew it. And so now for the past 3 to 4 weeks, we've been treated to the hysterics of, is this the end of the party? There's a battle for the soul of the party. It's the base against the elitists. It's the Tea Party Republicans against the Wall Street Republicans. It's the establishment versus the grassroots. It's Trumpers versus never Trumpers. Who's going to win the battle for the heart and soul of the Republican Party? And in 2016, when Democrats lost so big, the questions that persisted throughout 4 years, and I think we're even still seeing are persisting, was what's going to happen to the Democrat Party now? What are they going to do? Who are they going to cater to? It's a battle between the base of the party, that's the left-wing extremists, and the establishment of the party. It's a battle between the newcomers, the squad, and their point of view on everything, and the Nancy Pelosi's and Chuck Schumer's of politics. Who's going to win the battle for the soul of the Democrat Party? We face these questions every time one party or the other loses, no matter what the circumstances under which that loss happened. The reason why we have those questions is because the choices that we have, the choices that we can make regarding our candidates and our nominees and the people we eventually elect happen before we get to the presidential race. So it's actually not a bad thing that people are fighting within the party. That's actually how it's supposed to work. We're supposed to be making choices right now on this level. So at your local level, you're going to start choosing who you want to run your municipalities, but also you're thinking about who looks like a future party star to you. Is your state senator from your district like a real rock star and you're really hoping that he'll run for a federal position soon? Are your local elections putting forth base-friendly candidates? Like some areas in the country are electing a lot of very traditional Tea Party-ish Republican type. And in other parts of the country, they're really electing very hardcore left-wing extremist types, activist types. And those are signals that you send at that level as to who you would like to see push up through the party. You're sending signals to the top saying, these are the people that are actually making ripples here, right here on the ground at voting level. Maybe you might want to consider about giving them some support or consider supporting their positions publicly so you can maybe steal their support. Whatever message is being sent specifically, the idea is that these are cues, these are signals to the larger party about what kind of decisions voters in that party are making right now. We make those choices during the primaries. During the primaries, you have all kinds of politicians on that stage, right? The primaries don't look anything like what we end up with at the end of the day when it's time to run a presidential election. Look at the Democrat field. We can complain all we want about how we still end up with old white people, but that's not what their stage looked like. That's not what the Republican stage looked like as far as people who were running. It was a very diverse crowd on both sides. And during the debates, when their focus is not on, quote, the other side, their focus is on each other. I know a lot of people, I feel like this is a very naive position to take, but a lot of people complain about this. They say during the primaries, we shouldn't be going after our own side. We should be going after the other side. We should be united. We're Democrats. We should be united against Republicans. Well, no. This is how you guys, this is the choice. Do you see? This is where you get the diversity in choice. So no, these people should be going after each other. This is the battle. This is the battleground of the real ideas before someone has to mute everything just so they can get through a general election. This is where you get to make your decisions. You get to decide if you want the candidate who is pledging to defund the police or you want the candidate who is saying, hey, I actually support the police. Let's look at other options for criminal justice reform. Republicans, you get to decide if you want that Tea Party candidate or if you want a Jeb Bush, or if you want the guy who is like a John McCain. Well, I'm going to definitely reach over the aisle and work with those people. And then within our party, we fight it out to decide who gets to leave that battleground. You have decisions, but they are made at the lower levels, and that's not a bad thing. And I'm going to tell you why. When it comes to governing, everyone, every country in the world, every government in the world needs a political majority to legislate. That is not exclusive to the Republic. That is not exclusive to Great Britain or to Canada or to Taiwan or even China. You look at a place like that, communist countries, they've made sure, because they know they need a political majority to rule, well, they've made sure that there's never a political minority. So there's nothing different happening in the two-party system than happens in Parliament when it comes to that. Everybody has to form a majority to rule. So what happens for us is we do all the fighting, the clarifying, the scratching. We do all the cat fights and the arguing ahead of time so that when we get to the general elections, voters are pretty much funneling into one camp or the other, still with their differences, but still having said, okay, well, this is what we did, the process of elimination, and this is the person that we churned out. So we've done that annoying work. And now these two people can just run on forming a political majority to get done what the voters in the primaries have spoken that they would like done. The only difference between our republic and a parliamentary system is that in the parliamentary system, they have to struggle a lot longer while they're in office to get a political majority. Now you have all these factions and you have to form a coalition. And you're forming a coalition with people who have not agreed on some fundamental basics. And the coalitions then use their minority status as leverage instead of voices for the people. We accuse Republicans, conservatives accuse Republicans of doing this all the time, by the way. There are many conservatives who believe that Republicans feel comfortable being in the losing party, particularly here in the state of California, because believe it or not, there's some leverage there. Because according to some of our legal apparatuses, you may need to get a certain number of votes. And so you're going to have to pull over some Republicans to your side. If you need to reach across the aisle to get something that you feel passionately about passed, you're going to have to make some deals with Republicans. You're going to have to grease some palms, buy some box seats, fund some trips. All of these things play into an atmosphere of corruption. Not to say that this is the only thing. I mean, heaven knows. Again, going back to what's happening today, and there's some whispers about the White House maybe making some calls to get involved in all of this, which is also creepy. So we know that corruption happens, right? This is not the blame. I'm just saying this is one thing. This is one thing that can add to the ease with which corruption can grow. So some people are okay to settle into a losing team status in order to get leverage as the final straw, or as well, that's not a good analogy. Maybe like as the feather that tips the scale, so to speak. There is value in that. There is political value in that. You need to have your voters eventually, I mean, you don't need to, but I think it's beneficial to have your voters eventually funneled into these two categories, because it does make it easier to legislate from a political majority. You get all the ugliness done before your guy gets to office, and now it can just be, okay, this versus that.
Hi, my name is Sarah Lee, host of Marble Halls and Silver Screens with Sarah Lee, a podcast dedicated to exploring the connections, financial, ideological, political, and otherwise, between the Marble Halls of Washington, D.C. and the Silver Screens of Hollywood, California. I bring you the news unfiltered and with a perspective the mainstream press tends to ignore. So I do hope you'll check it out and enjoy the show. Download Marble Halls and Silver Screens with Sarah Lee at Apple Podcasts, iHeartRadio, or wherever you get your podcasts today.
This brings me to another point about the two-party system that I appreciate, and that is consolidating mandates and messages. Now, we all know that politics is every bit as much a marketing game as it is a character game or a principles game or a policy game. It is a marketing game. And because Americans, particularly in the days that we live in, have such a short attention spans, and by the way, I'm not criticizing people for that. We all have stuff to do. Nobody wants to spend their days and nights glued to the news trying to figure out the nuances of every single representative's and candidate's political view. So having a two-party system allows us to consolidate views under one single mandate or a single message that makes it easier for voters to decide which camp they want to gravitate towards. Then when those voters get to those camps, then those voters can decide. Again, the work of choosing has gone on in the lower levels. And now for those who didn't get in on that, who weren't a part of that wrangling and arguing, well, now they can look at what's come out of that and they can say, all right, well, look, if this year's big presidential argument is over abortion, I can decide, am I pro-abortion or am I pro-life? And so the Democrats are representing abortion and the Republicans are representing life. Maybe I'm pro-life. Maybe I'll look at the Republican side. Okay, let's see what this guy's got. Oh, well, he's good on abortion. Oh, but he is real bad on trade. And I have a lot of issues with trade. Then that person can make that decision from that point. If I'm just not happy with anything, even though I know I don't want to be with that party, which also is a valid thing, right? The process of elimination is every bit as valid as choosing someone. So now you can say, well, you know what? I know I don't want to go with the Democrats because I'm not really for abortion. And I do think it shouldn't be federally protected. But I don't really like all of the Republican stuff. So you know what? I'm going to go third party, or I'm going to go libertarian, or I'm not going to vote, or I am going to hold my nose and vote, whatever decision you make. It has made it easier to condense a lot of nuanced positions into something that most voters can take a bite out of. Again, that's not a bad thing. That's not an inherently bad thing. I think it's a good thing. It also consolidates the mandate, as I said. This is a great example of why it's really important for a president to go into office knowing what their mandate is from the people. For Bush, his mandate was to fight terrorism. I mean, that was clear when he came into office. That was clear. Obama, his mandate was to bring health care. That's what he had run on. His mandate was to provide health care, and I think some people would say his mandate was racial unity. I don't know how successful we were on that, but that's neither here nor there. Trump, you would say his mandate was that wall. You know, he ran on that. That was a real big deal. And I mean, it's hard. It seems like ancient times now, considering all the stuff we've been through since then. But that was a really big deal. He ran on that wall. His mandate was the wall. His mandate was reversing some of the Obama era policies. And we might say Biden's mandate. I'm not really sure I don't know what Biden's mandate is, to be honest. I think I need Biden voters to tell me. I didn't see one because he hardly campaigned. In my eyes, he hardly campaigned. So I don't really know what his mandate was, except maybe to reverse Trump policies. I mean, he signed 42 executive orders, a record, his first week in office. So I guess, yeah, sure. I guess that's his mandate then. Maybe the Supreme Court, maybe to pack the courts. Maybe that's his mandate. Maybe we should talk about packing the courts and what a disaster that will be for everybody if that's allowed to happen. That's just nuclear war right there. Not in the physical sense, but in the sense that, I don't know, should I save this for a show? I might not get a whole show out of it. It's nuclear war in the sense that now just every administration is just going to be, we're going to end up with like 800 Supreme Court justices. Because then what happens is the next administration comes in and says, all right, let's change it. We're going to go for not, instead of 12 judges, we're going to have 18 judges. And then the next people come in and we're going to have 27 judges. And it can go on and on and on. But having a mandate, did I get sidetracked? I totally got sidetracked. Having a mandate is really important to governing effectively. A great example of this is Abraham Lincoln. Abraham Lincoln at the time was running against, I think he was running as a Republican, and then were there Northern Democrats and Southern Democrats. I think there are Whigs. There were three parties, basically. And he won, but only with 40% of the vote. And then the rest of it was split among those other two parties. So when he took office, there was no consensus. There was no mandate. There wasn't even a real majority that was like super excited about him and there to support him. At least Trump, he had a significant majority when he took office. And those people went to the mat for him all the time. Because part of getting your agenda done is convincing the American people that your agenda should be done, that your agenda should be looked at. You need the support of the American people. It's as big a part as Congress is. It really is. And Trump had that. And Lincoln, arguably one of our greatest presidents, if for no other reason than his actions during slavery, Lincoln did not have a majority when he came into power. So with just 40% of what seems like a fairly anemic vote from what I'm looking at, I don't really recall what the overall population numbers were at the time, but it obviously wasn't even a fair vote because black folks weren't voting. But with just 40% of the vote, he was hated. He still probably is one of the most hated presidents in history, even though now history is kind to him. But technically speaking, based on what a president has to go through at the time of their administration, he probably does go down as one of the most hated men in history. And it brought us civil war. I'm not saying that just because he got 40% of the vote that we had civil war, but it was a contributing factor that he didn't have a clear mandate when he went in, and he didn't have a majority supported mandate. And so the people were not behind him. And he had to do something very difficult, something that cost him his life. And he had to do it without the support of the American people, and it almost didn't get done. There were a number of miracles that happened during the Lincoln administration. This is actually an interesting period in history to read about, and I'm sure JLTY listeners are way more educated on the Civil War era than I am. That's something I've only recently come to get involved in. I was studying Harriet Tubman for my film, Minty, which you can find anywhere on YouTube. Just search Minty, Harriet Tubman movie, and it's a short film. And so I had to learn a lot more than I knew about American Civil War era history. And I just think it's a fascinating time. So many nuances, so many moving parts. We distill, I think distill's the word of the podcast, guys. I get a word in my head every podcast that I cannot shake. And it just carries through the entire podcast. Today is distill. We distill the Civil War era politics down to slavery versus anti-slavery, North versus South, but it's actually way more complicated and way more fascinating than that. But regardless, as a sidetrack, all of this to say that a mandate is really important to keeping the peace. It's a vital part of governing, and it happens easier under a two-party system. Again, there's nothing different happening under the parliamentary system. It just seems like there is because there's more parties. But at the end of the day, all those people have to form coalitions too. All those people have to form a political majority in which to get things done. It just takes them longer and it's harder. And there's way more shenanigans because you've got way more palms to grease. This is one of the reasons that I like. I like the reasons I wrote down, you guys. One of the reasons I've written down that I actually like is that a two-party system actually makes it easier for each party to keep each other in check when one is in office. Now you get your imbalance, which we have now and which we have had in the past. It goes like that. It bees like that sometimes, you know. You get a year where you've got a Democrat president and Democrat Congress. And then you get a year like Trump had. You get 2 years where you've got Republican Congress, Republican executive branch. Obama had 2 years of Congress alongside the executive branch. It happens. It's not weird. Happens all the time. What also happens is Americans really tire very easily of one party rule, and then Congress flips. So while which I think is a very interesting apparatus, right, that's been built into the constitutional republic, something that other people don't necessarily have. I think this is interesting and it makes politics more exciting to me. But your congressional elections are every 2 years, and of course executive branch is every 4 years. So it's quite possible, and in fact very common, for a president to lose his Congress and have to be faced with a, quote, hostile Congress. That's actually how it should be. So having a very influential and powerful guy in office, let's say like a Trump or even like a Reagan, or I might say like a Clinton. I'd put Clinton up there. Having a guy like that who is just these guys are so engaging. They seem to really move the masses for better or for worse. I mean, this is not a judgment on where you fall on the political scale on this. I'm just making some objective observations here. Guys like that have a way. They have a thing. They have the thing. I don't know what it is. In Hollywood, it's called the thing. It's just the thing that moves people. It's an unknown quantity, but it is a very real thing. So a guy like that can really have outsized influence on voters, on lower level politics, on politics in Capitol Hill. And while the executive branch is the most powerful branch in the world, the most powerful branch in the United States is the legislative branch, which is also a very awesome thing. I love it. I love that other people view their world leaders as, just the most powerful person. But in the American system of government, Although they look at our president as the most powerful person in the world, and he is, they look at our president as that. In our country, for the people, he is not. I love that. I love it. It always makes me kind of want to be like, nanny, nanny, boo, boo. He's more powerful for you than he is for me. Because I have this legislative branch. They don't always do what I want them to do, but they hold more power over the president than the president himself. They hold more power over the ins and outs of daily life in the United States, certainly way more than the president himself, and that's the way it's supposed to be. So when the president himself wants to get weird or overreach or do whatever, we have a legislature that can check him when it's the opposite party. And eventually it will be, because eventually it always is. That's just how it goes. So when it's the opposite party, they are able to keep the executive branch in check. A good example is Clinton, who lost a congressional majority during his 8-year term, really had the social capital as supported by the media. And again, back then, you got to remember, there was no alternative media. There was Rush Limbaugh. That was it. When did we get Fox? Maybe during Clinton there was Fox, like in the later 90s. So there might not even be Fox. Back during the Clinton years, there was the tabloids, which are the only reason we know about the blue dress. And there was Rush Limbaugh. And then the rest was all of this media capital that Clinton had been given. He just had a ton of social capital, thanks to the media and thanks to the voters and thanks to the late night talk shows. He really could kind of do what he wanted. But he lost the congressional majority. And so to this day, you'll hear a lot of liberal or progressive fans of Bill Clinton come back at conservatives with, well, Clinton was actually he's a liberal, but he was actually a very conservative president. He lowered taxes. So what are you going to do about that? He actually restricted the welfare program and brought in welfare to work. He did that. Well, no, he didn't. Congress did that. And because he's not the most powerful person in the United States, he had to bend to Congress's will, and he had a Republican Congress. So it's actually a good thing. You have a coalition. If you have more than two parties in Congress, now you've got to spend all this time trying to gather a coalition, and you may never do it during this president's term, and he can just kind of keep on doing whatever while you guys squabble. A two-party system lets voters swing very easily, which I think is important to keep politicians in check. So if the Republicans think that they can cruise to victory on their base, that's always just been like, oh, we'll vote for you as long as you say you're going to protect pro-life positions, excuse me, which they never do when they get to Congress, but that's another story. It can hold accountable those politicians who want to make false promises based on what they think our traditions and values are. And it can scare them. It can scare the you-know-what out of them. One of the myriad of reasons why we got Trump. We ran 2 milquetoast candidates against the first black president who had the entire media industrial complex behind him. And in fact, the entire world, the man won a Nobel Peace Prize just for being black. Like that's what we were up against. And they ran John McCain, who didn't want to play dirty politics because it was a black guy, which cost him. And they ran Mitt Romney, who is just, by the way, y'all, if you're listening and you're a liberal voter and you're one of those people who's like, yeah, Mitt Romney's a stand-up guy. You know what? I'm old enough to remember when you guys were calling him Hitler. These games really tire me. They tire me. That's how we know no one means it. That's how we know it's not serious, because it's not serious. George Bush was literally Hitler until he said one bad thing about Trump, and now he's holding hands with the Obamas at inaugurations, and y'all think he's like a cute old man who paints pictures. But I lived through the Bush era, and I remember you guys calling him the worst things in the world, and no one's ever apologized for it. No one's ever said, well, maybe we were being a bit overdramatic. Sidebar. Welcome to Traveling Through Kira's Mind on JLTY. There's just so many paths to go down. My point is that GOP voters were not moved by either of these candidates and got in their corners because it was, again, you get to the end and you're like, well, these are my choices. Don't vote third party or vote for either of these guys. That's really the only vote that's going to move the needle at all. I'll sit this one out. Or what a lot of GOP voters is moved to the other side. They wanted to vote for the first black president. A lot of people just wanted to say that they did. And so they moved their vote. And then what happened is the GOP responded. The GOP realized, oh, no, we haven't motivated anybody. We've just driven them away with our same old, same old. And when it came time for the primaries, who ended up on that stage? A few establishment candidates and then Donald J. Trump. And we know how that turned out. People responded to the fieriness of him after being offered two very milquetoast candidates 2 elections in a row. And it scared the GOP. And for 4 years, the GOP started to get a lot tougher, a lot bolder, started to push back on the media, took on some of those Trump qualities. Now, a lot of them abandoned ship when the ship started sinking. But I just say all that to say that the two-party system allowed for the voters to swing back and forth and to scare each party accordingly. Our politicians should be scared of us. They should be scared of losing our votes. This is one reason why I'll never be a Democrat again. They are not frightened of losing my vote. They think they are entitled to my vote, and they have not given me they've not moved the needle one bit for my vote since I've been a voting adult. They assume because I'm black that I'm supposed to vote for them. And I think that's been very costly for the black community, if you ask me. And they're not scared by me leaving because black people are still only 12% of the population. So they don't even really need me, and they know it. They need my voice, they need my optics. But when it comes to legislating, no, they're not. They're not there. Another sidebar.
Hi, my name is Sarah Lee, host of Marble Halls and Silver Screens with Sarah Lee, a podcast dedicated to exploring the connections, financial, ideological, political, and otherwise, between the Marble Halls of Washington, D.C. and the Silver Screens of Hollywood, California. I bring you the news unfiltered and with a perspective the mainstream press tends to ignore. So I do hope you'll check it out and enjoy the show. Download Marble Halls and Silver Screens with Sarah Lee at Apple Podcasts, iHeartRadio, or wherever you get your podcasts today.
Lots of views under one roof make it easier to plug the leaks and fix the leaks. And I don't mean the leaks like people leaking information. What I mean is that when a lot of views are consolidated under one big tent, and again, that's where you do all your arguing. That's where you make all your choices. That's where you push for this policy or this candidate or that. That's where all the decision making goes on. So if you have all these views under one roof, then views that don't fit, then views that seem strange or iffy or icky, or you just don't want this to be encompassed in your tent, it's easier to locate those people and push them out to the fringes where they belong. In a parliamentary system, those fringes turn into a party. So a two-party system helps us deal with the fringes appropriately. I have this as a point on my list, but I think this goes back to what I was saying about marketing, is that it gives us simple touchstones. And again, when you're trying to legislate, when you're trying to get a point across quickly or succinctly, or you're trying to distill an idea, it's an easier touchstone for people to say, okay, this is what I'm reading when I see Republicans, and this is what I'm reading when I see Democrats. These are the things that stand out to me, and how it makes it a little easier to make a decision. Again, I can hear people screaming at me like, you think that people need to be simpletons in order to understand politics, and a multi-party system is more complicated, but isn't more complicated good? Because things are, we make the huge, another sidebar. We do ourselves a huge disservice, and we make a huge mistake when we assume that just because something looks complicated, that it is right. And we have tricked ourselves or been tricked into believing that there is some moral superiority in things being complicated, that makes them intelligent, that makes them valuable, that makes them well thought out. We need to get rid of that. Sometimes when you're reading something, if you don't understand it, it's not because you're stupid. It's because it's not understandable. I will give you a great example. Gavin Newsom. Governor Gavin Newsom here in California, handsome guy. A lot of people compare him to Patrick Bateman from American Psycho, and he kind of does. Like, he's got that slicked back hair, and he has those perfectly capped white teeth and that very sort of fake smile, and he's got this very fake countenance. I heard on the radio the other day that he's a prodigy of the Getty family. They have been supporting his career since they picked him out when he was like in middle school. So he's been their guy that they've been grooming to get into upper echelons forever. So he's not a Getty, but he's basically a Getty. So he went to finishing school to get rid of his dude, bro, California stuff. And so that's the guy you see now. Well, he's infamous for using $10 words to describe his policies or, whatever he's talking about on the news. And you can listen to him. When I first moved here, when we first got Newsom, I moved here under Jerry Brown. I would listen to him and I would think, I guess I'm not smart enough to get what he's saying. Like, he's using all these words and he has said a lot. I mean, he has stood up here for 2 minutes and the combination of words he's been using have been so complicated. I guess I just don't understand this policy. And then I came to realize, no, he's literally not saying anything. It's not Gavin Newsom who is the smart and nuanced and complicated one, and I'm just too much of a simpleton to understand it. I don't understand it because it is unintelligible. I was looking at an explanation on Reddit the other day. Somebody asked, one of my favorite subreddits is Explain It Like I'm 5. If you want to go check it out, it'll look like ELI5. I think that's the subreddit. And somebody said, why is it when you put a kettle on to boil, right before it boils, it gets really quiet and then starts to whistle? So someone had this really big explanation, and I stopped on that subreddit when it came up because I thought, hey, I want to know this too. That's not a question I've ever thought about it, but I'd like to know. And I read the explanation, the first one on the top that got a lot of upvotes, and I was like, I don't get it. Maybe I'm just too tired to understand it. And the next comment underneath it was like, okay, well, explain it like I'm 2 then. And so the person went back and gave a much more simplified version of it. And I still didn't understand it. And then somebody posted underneath and said, well, explain it like I'm in the womb. And I realized as I went back and reread the explanation that the reason why no one was understanding it is because it wasn't well done. Just because you don't understand something doesn't mean that it's because it's too complicated. Sometimes it's bullshit. So don't think that because I'm saying that a 2-party system simplifying things for voters is for simple voters. That's not a bad thing. Not everything needs to be complicated. Your stimulus bill does not need to take 6 months to get to you. A stimulus debate does not need to be complicated. The documents do not need to be 1,900 pages. You can do it in one. There's nothing in Congress that says a bill has to be X amount of words. You could do it in 3 or 4 sentences, $1,400 to every American, and for any American under the age of 18, $500. Boom, done. Anything else you want to write about, healthcare or what to provide for businesses or what stimulus you get if you have a business with 50 employees or 150 employees, that can all go in another bill. There's literally no law that says a congressional bill has to be 1,000 pages. They do that because they know that we will think that when things are very complicated that they're above us. And we won't ask questions, and they don't want us to ask questions. If the Republic is working well, people make their nuanced choices at the local level, and they make their general choices at the federal level. So having these two boring old white men at the top is not necessarily a bad thing. Some people will say this two-party system is bad. It creates gridlock. I think I've made the case for why it's no different than a multi-party system. There's plenty of gridlock in Parliament, folks. Americans have this very skewed idea of what life is like in European countries and Canada. We think that these people live in paradises just because they have free healthcare. That's it. Honestly, none of y'all would want to live in any of those countries long term, for the rest of your lives, based on anything other than free healthcare. And you know what, folks? You get what you pay for. So I've lived under free healthcare, and I know what it is, and it ain't always free. It sure as hell is not free when everybody's paycheck is 50% cut by 50% off the top by the government to pay for this free healthcare. Have I done healthcare yet on this show? Oh, that's one. I don't think I've done a healthcare episode. Well, as you can tell, I have feelings. You get what you pay for. Moving on, gridlock happens in parliamentary system, and it's even worse because now you have parties who are the committed losers. They are fine being the minority parties, and they use that as leverage, and it just creates more and more. You got more and more party structures to go through to get anything done. But the other thing that I always say, if you're a regular listener to this show, I've said it repeatedly, gridlock is not bad. Gridlock is actually built into the Constitution. We are supposed to be gridlocked. You are not supposed to be able to pass laws easily in this country. It should be way harder. Honestly, I think it should be way harder than it already is. Every year that Congress is in session, there's new law. How many laws do we need? There's laws governing everything from the tag that goes in the back of your shirt to, what type of gas you put in your car. There's laws about everything. How can we possibly need more laws? And yet that's what Congress does. They're there too long, first of all. We've been discussing term limits over at Davis Nation. If you want to join us over there, it's really hopping over there. We're really having some great discussions, talking about anything and everything. It's davisnation.locals.com. Get in now before the rates raise, but you get bonus content. You get, I pop in on conversations, give my opinions, and there's a lot of intelligent folks over there, people who are teaching me and giving me things to really ponder and think about. So get on over there, but we've been talking about term limits over there, and I have pros and cons for term limits. I have feelings on that, and I'm probably going to do a bonus on that at some point. But I do think that regardless of where we go with term limits, one of the things we could do is just limit the amount of time that Congress spends in Washington. They don't need to be there all year. Congress should be one session, like a couple of months, and then all those people who work there need to go home and live under the laws that they've created. They go back to their jobs. Whatever they should have real jobs. That's the other thing. Congress has become a job. Congress should not be a job. Your job should be your job, and Congress should be your public service. So it shouldn't be easy to pass laws in this country. If it's easy, you get California. Every stupid idea that goes through the California Assembly gets passed. There's no one to stop it. There's no pushback. There's nothing. The only apparatus we have here for pushback at this point is recalls. And they never work, except this one against Gavin Newsom is looking like it's going to fly. And that's a big deal. 57 recalls, I think, in the history of California. And only one has been successful, and that's Governor Gray Davis in 2003. By the way, I'd like to invite you to go to recallgavin2020.com. Download the petition and take it around to have people sign. Again, obviously, this is for California residents. Or they have a cool petition locator on there. You just search your town on there, and you can see where your nearest petition. You have to sign in person. I think they need about 300,000 more signatures to break the safety barrier. I think they've already broken the requirements for signatures, but there's a lot of signatures that get thrown out because they're double signatures, or, people forget that they sign and they sign again, or they might be fake signatures. So to get outside of the danger zone, they're looking for another 300,000. Gavin Newsom needs to be recalled. There is nobody in the state who is happy with the job he's doing. It has nothing to do with being conservative or liberal, Republican or Democrat at this point. This man is a disaster. But to recall him is the only message we have to send to an assembly that is basically ruled by one party. And every dumb idea they have gets passed. So when you want to laugh at all the stupid laws we have here, like the law that says you can steal up to $950 a day in merchandise from any given store and not be arrested or prosecuted for it. Yes, that's an actual thing. A day. Because they wanted, it's justice. They want to get petty crimes off the books. The way you get petty crime off the book is to make it legal, I guess. Stuff like that. There's nobody in the legislature to stand up and say, hang on, this is stupid. We're not passing this. California is what you get when there's no gridlock. Gridlock is good. Do not be afraid of it. Now, yes, it's frustrating in things like the stimulus check when all of us need the money that we've been sending to these folks back so that we can survive while they tinker around with our lives with these stupid closures. Yeah, that is when gridlock should make you mad, especially when every single politician is standing up there telling you how much they care about you. Some people say a two-party system foments hostility between people. Yes, it does. And that is the downside. I don't like that part at all. It seems like it's easier to focus hate when you've just got like two targets instead of that spread out among 3 or 4 or 5 political parties. We can be like, well, we hate these people because they're the anti-environmentalists. And we hate these people because they're the environmentalists. And we hate these people because they're pro-nuclear power. And we hate these people because they want us to go only to wind power. Like, it's easier to spread the hate. But with a two-party system, it gets really focused. And we're living the results of that right now. So that is a downside that I really can't argue with. And it's unfortunate. And I don't know what the solution to that is, but I don't think that's the solution is moving to a parliamentary system. Look, folks, there's a reason why the United States still, for now, and for everything that's going on, is still the most powerful and most important and most successful country in the world and probably in the history of the world. It's not an accident that we don't look to Canada to protect us, right? It's not an accident that we don't look to England to support our economy. It's not an accident that people literally risk their lives and risk the lives of their children to come here. These things are not accidental. All the ways that our government works now, all of that has played a part in making us a superpower and making us the envy of the world. So to say like, well, we need to change things, well, hang on. Don't be changing stuff willy-nilly. There's a reason why we're so successful. You can go back to my, I have a couple Second Amendment shows. I think one on gun control, and I think I have one on the Second Amendment. But that's an argument that people always make against the Second Amendment. Like when you point out that the Second Amendment isn't about hunting. It's not about hunting, you guys. I don't know whoever brought that into the situation. There'll be people like, you don't hunt. You don't need a gun if you're not going hunting. I approve of the Second Amendment for hunting. Well, okay, that has nothing to do with hunting. The Second Amendment was proposed by a group of revolutionaries who had just fought a revolutionary war against a colonial empire that had stripped them of their right to bear arms and therefore their right to resist. So your Second Amendment rights have more to do with keeping the electorate capable of resisting government should the time arise again. So you say that, and anti-Second Amendment people will be like, oh, okay, Miss Tinfoil Hat, that's so crazy. You're insane. You think that any minute the government's going to come into your house and take your things and march your family off to the gulags. You're so crazy. Yeah, that's really something we have to worry about. No, I don't think that that's going to happen because we have a Second Amendment. It's not an accident that I think that that is not going to happen. It's not an accident that you think that that's not going to happen. It's not an accident that you find the notion of the government doing those things to you ridiculous. It's not an accident. The reason you think it's ridiculous is because you don't have to worry about it, because you have the Second Amendment. It's really messy for our government to consider doing some of the things that other countries do to their citizens, because we are armed. It's not like the government can't blow us all up if they want to, but you can't rule the people who aren't there. So that's really not on the list of options for our government. Our government works on the subconscious notion that the people have the ability to resist whenever they want, and resistance comes with a very heavy price, which we actually know intimately, have experienced throughout the history of this country. So don't think that just because other countries do it another way and they have free health care that they're doing it better. None of those countries are superpowers. All of those countries are looking to us to lead the globe, to lead the global economy, to lead global responses to crisis. All of those countries look to us. We don't look to them. That's not an accident. Our two-party system is a part of what allows us to be successful. So I think that the two-party system is good, and I don't think it needs to go anywhere, but it is not perfect, and it will never be perfect. But we can play our part by helping it function healthily and properly by paying attention, by understanding what the choices we're making at our local and lower levels, and by putting all of that in the appropriate context, and by putting what the executive branch is allowed to do in the appropriate context. Then a two-party system works for all of us. All right. Thanks for hanging in there today. I hope I made my point. Stay tuned for the death penalty episode, which should be coming on the heels of this. I promise. I've been promising it for a while, so I'm just going to do it. And what else I want you to know? Go to davisnation.locals.com, davisnation.locals.com. Join our community over there. We got all kinds of stuff going on. Follow me on Twitter, Real Cure Davis, if you dare, but Twitter's very political. I try to keep it even-handed here, but you have to understand, you remember, that I am a conservative commentator, so I do my job on Twitter. JLTY is where I get a rest from all the partisanship, and I can just really think about things as a person rather than Cure Davis, pundit, But if you're into that and you want to go get some red meat from me, go ahead, go over there, Real Cure Davis. If you have comment, if you have questions, if you disagree with me or agree with me and you want to write me, send me an email at kiradavis@pm.me. Pira. It's definitely time for me to go because this is when I start getting a little punch drunk. All right. I've talked myself into confusion. kiradavis@pm.me. That's a Proton Mail account. And please label in the subject line your email JLTY. And that way I'm knowing to look out for it. I'd also appreciate it if you'd drop a review or a rating on iTunes. That helps so much with the algorithms. And check out our other podcast, A Very Merry Podcast, which is on hiatus right now, but we'll be cutting some bonus episodes very shortly. So if you want to just have some fun, we went through the whole Hallmark Christmas season. Amelia Hamilton and I did. We broke down all of the fun rules of the Hallmark universe and talked about some of the movies and some of the tropes. And we had a great time. People responded great. So we decided we're not going to end for the Christmas season. We're just going to keep going, but just release bonus episodes until next Christmas season, and then we'll pick up another regular schedule. But we had so much fun, and the feedback was so great, we weren't willing to just walk away from it. So check that out. Get all caught up so that you can really enjoy our bonus episodes that are coming up. All right, it's time for me to go. Everyone, before we talk again, remember, every once in a while, just stop and listen to yourself.
The FCB Radio Network. First class broadcasting worldwide.